Good day to viewers, the Colonel speaking to you live, well, not from the Grange, or indeed the Preceptory. We're at the Lay Rectory, or Pondicherry Lodge as it's sometimes known, which is the gracious home of the Squire. I've motored up from the Preceptory. My chauffeur is outside. Oh, that reminds me, Squire, well, could we take her a cup of tea out after we've done the
yes,
recording?
I'm sure we could.
And we're here with the Squire. Good afternoon to you, Squire.
Good afternoon everyone.
And we're on to part 2 of the Squire Rambles on, and here we go. Now, we ended yesterday at our last talk, but we left something rather hanging in the air, which is appropriate because we left the umbrella story. Would you mind telling us, you told us that thereby hangs a tale, but you didn't tell us the tale.
I was waiting for somebody to spot my purposeful mistake.
They didn't.
But anyway, what happened was, it goes back to a trip I made to London, and I used to go around the same places, and one of them was Gramophone Exchange. I'd gone round and I'd bought a few things that I wanted to, and I got home. And I didn't think anything about it for a few days, and then I realised I'd lost my umbrella. And so I just had to grumble and go and buy a new one. Well, I should think six months later, I went on the same walk round London to the same places, and I went into Gramophone Exchange, and hanging up on the wall was my umbrella.
Oh.
And I said to the man, he said, so I knew somebody would come back for it eventually. So that's the tale on that one.
What was it like buying at Gramophone Exchange? So I don't think many people alive today actually shopped there. It was. Could you describe the place for us?
It was very old-fashioned. It was a lot of collectors had their own boxes. You know, the record boxes, the packing.
A sort
boxes.
of pigeonhole.
Yeah, you had it. If you went in there regularly, they let you have you had a box. And then if anything came in they thought you were interested in, they put it in your box, and so you went to check your box and buy if you wanted it from there. I met all sorts of people in there looking at records.
Sounds like something out of the 19th century.
It was different, very different.
And what were the records priced like? What did you buy there? Is a question I should ask, I suppose.
I think I bought I bought a few single-sided ones. They had them. If I remember rightly, they had coloured tape on the sleeves, and I think that was a price code, if I remember rightly now. And I remember there were a lot of general records that were out there, less specialist, and I bought a few from there. But there was a lot to see, and then the gentleman there asked me what I was interested in, and I told him, and then he directed me to the other sections where the records were more expensive. But I think,
well, that was good.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And what were you looking for? What did you find in such a place?
Well, really, as always, I was looking for something that was a bit different.
Right.
Out of the ordinary, unusual labels, maybe. Certainly, if anything was different technically. I mean, I've always been interested in the technical side of recording, so anything that is different, or shall we say is a bit of a challenge to get played, is of interest to me.
What, a sort of different size, or a vertically cut perhaps, or something of that nature?
Yes, that's right. Yes, indeed. Anything that requires a bit of a challenge.
Right.
It's like gramophones, really. I appreciate some of the wonderful cabinet styles that have been done, but to me the main interest is in the technical side of the gramophone. It can have a marvellous case and be boring technically, but I tend to like the things that are more technically more interesting.
Alas, a great many are like that. They are really pieces of furniture that happen to play records rather than technically innovative. And for me, I've never found anything that combines the two, that's actually technically, you know, first class, and also in a first class cabinet. It doesn't seem to coincide.
Well, I suppose really the only thing I can think of would be things like the HMV Re-Entrance.
Yes.
And the Columbia Plano Reflex. The Plano Reflex gramophone, that's the one with a Plano Reflex horn. Those are two big gramophones that are always worth getting hold of. And some of the Decca ones are pretty fantastic as well. The Decca, I think it's the 77, there's a Wonderful cabinet gramophone.
Yes, they are. They're fantastic. They're I suppose somewhere between a 163 and a 194, but nearer to the 163 in sound.
Exactly.
But not
yes.
quite the same price though, luckily.
No, indeed not.
Mm. And did you buy anywhere else in the country?
Probably locally. I used to buy quite a lot in Bath.
Right.
I used to go down to Bath a lot, and there were one or two places I used to find some really interesting things. There was, I think it was a Great Western antique centre down there, and there was a man there that used to do gramophones with his son, and I bought my first 16-inch cinema film soundtracks from him.
Right.
Which I've got upstairs, and they're the disc soundtracks that went with the original, the old early talking films.
Sort of 2 reel films.
Indeed, yes.
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 How many discs would they have per film? Any ideas? I suppose it varied.
Well, it depended on the number of reels, because if a reel of film lasted between... Because what you had was, in those days, you had a cinema would have been equipped with 2 projectors, with disc playing equipment on the back. And the projectionist would have to start with disc 1 and reel 1, and then while that was running, get the second projector prepared, and then it must have taken a lot of training, but to try and visually and audibly change projectors without anybody noticing, going from one to the other. You see, if anybody's seen a 16-inch soundtrack disc, they're usually centre start. In fact, I think they're all centre start. And there is a mark in the middle. There's an arrow usually pointing out from the label with a position marked start, and that's where you'd put the needle on. And then on the film there was a frame marked start, which you put in the gauge of the projector. And then, with a bit of luck, if the film didn't break or anything like that, then the two ran somewhere near synchronised. But it was a non-synchronous system, but they tried to synchronise them like that.
I think if anyone's really interested in that sort of thing, they can see a perfect example in the film The Smallest Show on Earth, which features the Bijou Electric Kinema with Peter Sellers as the projectionist. It's well worth looking at. Now, you were telling me earlier about a wonderful machine we saw at the Whitney Gathering, the Blankenstein's machine. Could you tell me how you got hold of that machine? Because, by golly, it's unusual.
Well, what happened there, there used to be 1 or 2 antique fairs in Whitney, and there was one at the secondary school. It's now it's called Wood Green School now. It used to be called the secondary school in those days, and they had an antique fairs in there, and I was looking round, and 2 ladies came up to me who lived in Hayley, and they said, "Are you still interested in gramophones?" Oh yes. Oh yes, definitely. And they said, "Well, we've got one at home. We wondered if you'd like to come and have a look at it." So I duly arrived up there, and they came in carrying this enormous aluminium horn, which I've since measured. It's 38 inches long and 22 inches across the bell.
With a red interior.
With a red interior.
It's a Continental G&T horn, I should point out, viewers.
And I thought, wow, what am I going to see next? And the next thing they brought in was a canvas packing box. And so I was quite getting excited by this time. I could see a sort of huge G&T senior monocle, something coming out of there. But in fact it was something I didn't recognise at all. But it was obvious to me that the two had been made like it from parts in some time in the history. It hadn't been put together recently, because they told me that their father bought it for them in about 1936, and he bought it from a big house sale at Wilcott, which is near Hayley.
It's just across the fields, isn't it?
It is,
what's the name of the house?
Well, it was either Wilcott Grange or Wilcott House. I'm not quite sure the name. It was actually, I think what it was, there was an estate at Wilcott, and it was split at that time. I think it was sold up, and the two were sold off separately. Anyway, the thing was that their father bought them this gramophone and came home with it on the back of his bicycle, which must have been nearly a 2-mile push with this wretched thing in his packing case. And then they said, "Well, where's the horn?" "Oh, I don't know," he said. "Well, you'll have to go back and get the horn." So he had to go puffing back 2 miles or so to go and get the horn for the gramophone. And they'd had it all those years and played it when they were young, and they were quite elderly when I bought it. And I think really it's probably one of the most extraordinary gramophones I've ever bought.
I think it is. It's the sort of thing, unfortunately, that a modern day dealer would probably take the G&T back bracket off and flog it separately, and take the horn and flog it separately. The bass has been identified by various experts as a Thorens Royal bass. It has got a massive motor in, hasn't it?
Oh, terrific. It's so versatile though. You can play everything on it from 20-inch Pathés right down to those sort of 3.5-inch Imperial advertising records. It'll play almost anything on
And
there.
how many standard records would that play?
I haven't run it for a long time, but I think it played 5, maybe 6 12-inch sides on a winding, and that's a double spring motor.
Yeah.
So it's an enormous double. I think the springs are nearly 2 inches wide, so it's an enormous double spring motor.
Yes. Dear oh dear oh dear. And have you bought any other notable machines like that under similar circumstances?
Have to think a little on that one, but yes, I've had various people. I had another case at another antique fair. Sorry, I'm getting a bit of a cough. And this man came to me and said, my father died in the First World War, was killed in the First World War, and he had a gramophone that he bought and the records to learn to dance to.
Right.
And he said, well, I think it's time we sold it. It's been up there or in the attic since then.
What date would this have been?
I would say about 1980, 81. I think I had it before I bought the big Blankensteins.
Right.
And I said, well, yes, I would like to see it. He said, well, I'll bring it over to you. So he came over in the car, and it was a very interesting box of single-sided records. There, single-sided zonophones and G&Ts and records like that. And the gramophone was a intermediate Monarch.
Good Lord.
An original gramophone. It wasn't a G&T, it was the later one, the Gramophone Company and sister companies. But it was a really nice Monarch gramophone.
And it'd been up in their attic for what, 65 years by that stage?
At least, yes. They hadn't used it since he died, and it was up there. Another person had told me they'd seen it up there, so I did know about it, but I didn't expect to get it. But it was really nice to get, because at that time it was probably the best horn gramophone I'd managed to acquire.
I seem to recall that went to a collector in Oxford.
Yes, it did. Yes, that's right.
Probably still got it.
I expect he has. Yes.
And what about, we're talking about a very rare subject here, but your experiences with EMG and experts. Have you ever handled a large expert machine or something like that in the last 40 odd years?
Yes, I bought one.
Or 24 hours?
I bought one from a chap in London a long time ago, and it was rather great actually, because it was a Mark 10A, nice gramophone. It was really really nice one, and I'd wanted to get something like that, and I went up and he'd got it in his shop, and I said, well, I've just come up on the train, so I can't possibly take it with me now, and I said, I'm very interested. I'll have a think about it. So
that would make a wonderful silent film, wouldn't it?
Oh, gosh.
Getting a large EMG home on the train, it'd be like something like Laurel and Hardy, wouldn't it?
I think if I had anything to do with it, it would be. And then, of course, the question I said, well, do you think I'd got such... I can't remember the car I'd got at the time, Renault 12, I think I had then. I said, do you think I'll get the horn? He said, oh yes. He said, I've managed to get a double bass into a Morris Minor.
A what?
A double bass into a Morris Minor.
Is that what he said to you?
He said, yes, that's right. Intriguing, but he said it was true, and I got no reason to doubt it. So it was one of those interesting stories.
I'm somewhat lost for words there. A double bass into a Morris Minor.
Yes, that's right.
That sounds like some sort of horrible euphemism. But anyway, have you ever seen or bought any... how did you get on with it? Did anything exciting happen with that machine when you got it home?
Well, it was nobody's fault, obviously, but I went with anything to do with electrics, and when I'm speaking to you, I would impress on anybody listening or watching this to be very careful with any gramophone which is electrically operated. Make sure it's checked out before you use it. Now, I always do, and I'm one of these people who've usually got, if I'm going around old equipment, I've usually got an electrical testing screwdriver, and it was a good job I checked this, because it was dead live. And if I had have touched it with wet hands, I'd have probably have been severely injured. But
No,
it's just one of those things.
I don't mind laughing.
In those days, it was just one of those things.
Is that
What?
because, as I seem to recall, EMGs have a round plug, or some EMGs, original ones, have a round Bakelite plug on the back that can be plugged in the wrong way round?
This one didn't. This
Oh.
one had locators on it, but it was just one of the all. I just modified the wiring. You see, with a lot of old electrical equipment, it's going to be connected to the mains the right way. It's like some of those if those radios like Bush DAC 90s, they are what we call AC and DC radios, and one side of the chassis, one side of the mains is connected to the chassis.
Right.
So that forms one of the conductors, and the internal wiring is the rest of it. So it's important to couple it up so that the neutral side is on the chassis and not the live side.
Yes.
If we do that, then it's okay. But you've got to use the mains test. It'll soon tell you if it glows, you've got a problem.
Well, what you've got to do is actually ask an expert,
Well,
really,
absolutely,
haven't you?
absolutely.
Don't do what the Colonel did and plug in an early electrical thing into the brand new wiring of the preceptory. I nearly burnt the place down. What a great idea that would have been after spending all the money I have on it. Anyway, have you seen any other EMGs or experts? Didn't you buy that large EMG horn once?
Oh yes, that was when I was working at Oxford University Press. I used to work after I finished the farming days. I went to work at Oxford University Press, which was one of the main printing houses in England, and it was a very important place at the time. And I started there in 1971 after we sold the farm, and when I got to know people there, they were great folk to work with. It was a very friendly, enjoyable, interesting place. A lot of real characters you don't find today, real characters, but it was a brilliant place to work. We were in the printing division, printing side, because OUP was in two sections. There was the printing side and the publishing side. Well, the publishing side, when I first went there, was mostly based in London, but they'd moved more down as time went on. But when I went, it was a grand old place. In fact, I suppose today, if you went into a factory, they would have a wages department. In there, they called it the counting house.
Yes.
And they had had a man in the working. He was in charge of the counting house. Very nice gentleman, but he'd run Ron Moody a close second as Fagin to speak to. He was marvellous chap though, very ever so nice. It was really
well, of
good.
course, they moved out of the Clarendon building, the Clarendon Press, in I think 1830.
Yes,
and they opened up at
Walton Street.
Walton Street,
That's
yes.
right. Yes, that's right.
Extraordinary. But how did you find this horn?
Well, the thing is that as I met people, it was a bit of a difficult time for me, because I'd been working on the farm and in a sort of fairly small environment, and then going into basically a factory with lots of people with different ideas. It wasn't easy to start with to settle into that, but I eventually found things that interested me, and as I got to know people and they knew I was interested in gramophones and records and things like that, various ones of them used to come up and say, "Oh, I know I've got some records at home, are you interested?" Or, "My mother's got some records, are you interested?" But anyway, this particular day, one of the men came and said, "Look, I've seen this in the paper," and it was an advertisement and it was a large gramophone horn.
Well, that's intriguing.
Intriguing, large gramophone horn. And so I thought, well, I've got to go and have a look at that.
You can mention the price if you like.
Oh yes, well, I bought it, and I think it cost me £7.
And what was it? A large
It was a large EMG horn, yeah.
Good
yeah,
Lord.
It was an EMG
but no
gramophone.
bass?
No. The annoying part about that was 10 or 15 years earlier, when I was on the farm, I used to go to a sale in Witney. It was called the Church House Sale, where I could go with a couple of pounds and come back with a couple of cabinet gramophones with 2 or 3 boxes of records for a couple of pounds. But in the sale there was an EMG bass that would have fitted this horn.
Oh dear.
Which I didn't get, and I think it sold for the princely sum of £2. So for about 10 quid I could have had an EMG gramophone quite early on.
Goodness me.
If the two had come together, but they didn't.
It's often the way, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because you owned a Mark IV EMG
Yes, that
early
was a
on
very
as well.
nice one. Yes, a very nice Mark IV. Yes, yes. That was one which was EMG usually put an ivory badge on, but this one didn't have anything. It was obviously handmade. It was a papier-mâché horn. I guessed it was EMG. It had got an adjuster on the, that adjuster they have on the end of the gooseneck.
Oh, the quink tube.
That quink tube. That's right. Yes, it had one of those. I didn't have an original sound box, but I think I only gave about £10 for it. Did it up and eventually sold it.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And you were telling me earlier you saw a sort of strange, is it EMG or expert radiogram?
Oh yes, a local antique dealer got hold of one of these. It was, now let me think, it had got a big loudspeaker, probably about 4 feet square. I think it was finished in rosewood on a stand. And then there was a very ornate cabinet with it, which I think you could either use it acoustically with a horn or electrically through a radio. It was a combination thing. The cabinet was probably about 3 feet high, and there was a position where a horn had been, but the fitting had been taken off, and the radio was still in there, and the loudspeaker was a 12-inch diameter electromagnetic speaker.
By whom?
I think it was a Rice Kellogg speaker or something. RK, I seem to remember. But who actually made it? I don't the name. I know the initials RK came to mind with it. It might have been a BTH. I can't remember, but it was a big speaker. But what had to happen to it? The sound was obviously connected to the sound of the radio, but the actual magnet had to be plugged into the mains, because the magnet. A lot of pre-war radios, the magnet was electromagnetic, so it was called a mains energized loudspeaker, and it was only usable when the set was turned on. I mean, ordinary speakers, hi-fi speakers, you don't have to plug them into the mains because they're permanent magnet. But in the old radios, the magnet was actually part of the set. It acted as a smoothing choke to smooth the mains hum. But with this one, it was more specialised, and into the base of the speaker was a mains unit with a trunk. I think there was a valve in there, a radio valve in there.
Good
so
Lord.
That was, you plug that into the mains, and that was a mains unit to drive the speaker. I'd got it working for this dealer. It had got a huge output valve, PX25 or something like that, so it poked out quite a lot of sound. But he moved it and got the connections wrong and blew the loudspeaker out. Nothing I could do. I did warn him, but he moved it and just connected that wrong, and bang up it went.
Sort of genius thing I do, strangely enough. Especially the day when I plugged in that radio and there was smoke everywhere, and I thought the preceptory was on fire. But anyway, we won't go into that too much detail. You were telling me about buying early records at a very oddly named place at Leafield. Can you tell us about that, please?
Oh, well, that was an experience. There was on the way into Leafield from Hayley, there was a house on the left-hand side, and there were a family of real characters lived there, and they had this junk shop. They used to call it the ye olde junk shoppy in Old English, and you went in there and you thought, gosh, am I going to come out of this alive?
Oh yes, I've thought that many times. What sort of date would this be?
I would say mid-1960s.
Right.
And the place was a collection of sheds leading from one to another, and you had to sort of almost had to crouch down. You had to pull your arms right in and squeeze past the stuff that was stacked up and sort of look like just turn your head round to try and see it all. It was absolutely crammed in, and I remember you went through. It was 3 or 4 sheds. It was quite a route march to get from one end to the other.
And how big were these sheds?
Well, I suppose they were chicken house size, I suppose.
So quite substantial.
They were quite big, and there were lots of things in there. It was one of the places where you could find something really. It was like something out of another age, really, and there was all sorts of things. And I bought 1 or 2 horn gramophones from there, and he had a huge pile of records. I went through there, and I think that's where I found my first 10-inch single-sided zonophones and G&Ts. I remember I had an Edward Lloyd record from there. If With All Your Hearts, I think, from Elijah I had from there. I used to go there every now and again, and he used to get more records in. and so that was where I started to find early stuff. And then they sold that, and they bought a big place in Milton under Wychwood, and that was enormous. And it'd been a school and a corn mill at various times. And when you went in the door, you're greeted by this enormous stuffed bear in the door, stuffed brown bear going sort of, it made you jump out of the skin when you went through the door.
Do you know the Steptoes used to have one of those?
Very similar indeed.
Yeah,
yes.
Dear, oh dear.
I'm afraid characters are long gone now, it's a pity.
There aren't many junk shops about, are there, anymore?
Not like that.
You used to buy in Reading, as I understand.
Yes, I did. Reading was quite productive in the 60s. I used to have a friend at Reading University, and I used to go over there to see him every now and again. I used to go over and used to have a day going around the junk shops. The main place to go in those days was the Oxford Road. But in the centre of Reading, most of the junk shops in those days were what I call at the top end of the Oxford Road. That's just down from the centre. But while I was going there, they put that enormous road through the middle of Reading. Do you know the one that goes under a lot of it?
Yes.
That huge dual carriageway road. And I remember that being built, and they had a big bridge over it. And then most of the junk shops were relocated lower down, or they were lower down the Oxford Road, or there was another building they had called the Emporium.
Right.
Where a lot of the dealers went into, and I bought fairly well from there. It was always a good place to go to for a day's buying at Reading. Very interesting.
I don't think it's worth going now, though, is it?
I'm afraid I haven't been for probably 15 or 20 years, so the rumours I hear, a lot of it's all gone now.
A bit like a lot of these places. I used to buy quite well down at Christchurch Road in Boscombe, which at one time was lined either side with antique and junk shops, and you could find all sorts down there.
Well, you see, you think what Oxford used to be like.
Yes.
So you think of Park End Street. You had the Antique Trading Company. You had the place opposite that did a lot of pine furniture. You had the Jam Factory. Yeah. Big places. It was worth somebody's while to go to Oxford to have a walk round. Now look at it, there's very little. The Jam Factory is now a small. The people who are in there are in High Street, called Antiques on High. That's still going very well too. Very nice it's going. But the Jam Factory was a marvellous place. It was such a collection of things in there. It was amazing.
Yes, I actually met the Squire there, viewers, in 1996. How do I know? Because it's in my diary. And you had a stand in there selling gramophones.
Yes, that's my signboard that I had up there at the back. Yes, the Greening's Vintage Gramophones. People often wondered why I didn't use my own name, but the problem was that there was a firm of auctioneers within reach which had the same name, and I didn't want people getting confused, so I used the old family name of Greening. Yes,
because your family had a furniture making business in Oxford.
Oh, they did, yes.
Your mother's family,
That's right, yes, they did, on Cowley Road. Well, they started, I think, in High Street. Had a shop in High Street. They had an antique shop in the front, which one of my mother's uncles ran, and then at the back they had what it basically was three or four brothers who came out of the First World War, and they were woodworkers, and they eventually formed this company, Greenings, that made a lot of furniture. They were manufacturers and wholesalers, and eventually they had a biggish factory on the Cowley Road. So yes, that's where that name came from, and so I used it to head the business at that time.
Because a lot of antique dealers at the time had workshops for restoration and repair and that, and they often later turned into independent businesses making furniture in the 20s, because there was a boom in furniture with all the house building of these 3-bedroom semis and that.
Well, of course, the point is that was true, and they had a workshop at the back where they did a lot of modification of antique furniture, a lot of old furniture. I mean, you can't see it on the film, but there's a piece there, a glass-fronted cabinet for a china cabinet, they're covered underneath. They look identical, but they're not. They were put together like that.
Yes, and you've got a Bible box outside, which has got a stand, which was a common thing to happen in the 20s.
It was really to make furniture saleable that was difficult to sell.
Yes, that's one way of putting it.
Well,
some of the others were less scrupulous, Nigel. And they used to take tall boys and take the top half off and make a chest of drawers, and then the bottom half would be as well. Or they'd make knee-hole desks. So I'd say to people, if you're buying fine furniture, be very careful. They've had 80 or 90 years to look right, but aren't.
Well, that's.
But I seem to recall your uncle had some very interesting stories about the Great War.
Oh yes, indeed.
Or your mother's uncle, perhaps.
Oh, which was that, Uncle?
Uncle Gilbert, was it?
That was my father. Which
Yes. I don't know. You were telling me earlier when we were.
Oh my word, I can't remember. It just slipped my mind. Who was that now? About the Great War. Oh dear. Can I go on to something just for a minute?
Yes. Yes. Don't worry. Don't
sorry,
worry.
I've just forgotten that bit. I must have slipped my mind.
Yes. Thinking about finding gramophones locally was not a good source. You were saying. Were there things like 202 HMV 202s and 203s about?
Oh no, you wouldn't see stuff like that. The best, there were one or two dealers I used to buy off and used to get. I think the best thing I found was a 163 in Witney, but no, I didn't see anything like 202s, 203s. They were very unusual.
And you owned a 203 later, didn't you?
Yes, that's right. Yes.
How did you get hold of that?
That was when I was in the jam factory. It was nearly the place that hadn't long to go before it closed, and then some people came. They lived in Goring, and they said, "Oh, we've got this gramophone. It's very big." His master's voice.
That's a good sign.
Got my ears sort of pricked up a bit. I said, "Yes, well, I'd like to come and see that." And it was a 203, and they got it in a basement. So I had to get some help. I had to carry a 203 up the basement stairs. You can imagine what that was like, trying to get that up. You know, you sort of had the cabinet was about 2 inches narrower than the staircase.
Good Lord. And wasn't there an interesting story about that machine? Hadn't her sister bought it for her brother?
Oh yes, it was a story really. Yes, I think the girl they'd lost their parents, these brother and sister, and the sister gave it to her brother for a birthday present.
21st birthday.
Something like that. Yes.
How interesting.
They must have been pretty well off to be able to afford a 203, which was about 75 or 80 £80 at that time, wasn't it?
Well, yes, that was a heck of a lot of money when you think country cottages
that's right.
were making sort of £180, £200 at the time. You know, it's a large investment. Some of these things were not cheap.
No, indeed not.
And that's why there aren't too many of them about, really.
No, very much so. Golly, no.
And what about on the farm? What did your parents think of you collecting? It's not too personal a question, of course.
Well, I think father wasn't too bad with it. Mother was a bit edgy about it, but I just carried on really when I could. I went on adding to the collection. I was interviewed by the press once or twice, which brought in more things, and then I was on Radio Oxford once or twice, which also brought in more items.
Well, you kindly gave me a copy of the Clarendonian magazine from, I think, what was it, 1970?
74.
74, where they'd interviewed you and photographed your then collection. In fact, I may put it, if you don't mind, as the frontispiece to this video.
Well,
one of the photos from it, not the whole article.
The thing is with that the Clarendonian was the press magazine for the workforce, and it was published quarterly, and people contributed items to it. It's one of those typical works magazines. It was things like the Ex-Servicemen's Association, the sports, because there were a lot of sporting sections to OUP. There was football, cricket, swimming, and the chap who was the editor at the time, who was also interested in jazz and records, and he asked me would I write an article for the page, which I did, and that's the one that got published in the Clarendonian in 1974.
Good Lord.
But I wrote the article, and I managed to must have got it somewhere near right, because they didn't edit a word of it.
Oh, that's good.
And I had to get somebody to take photographs of the then items in my collection, and they used the pictures in the article. But the funny part about that was when the press closed, which was 1989, one of the men from the type department came to see me and said I found these, and they were the 5 blocks, the original blocks they'd used to print the pictures from.
How astonishing!
And I've got those in storage somewhere.
So you could actually reprint the article.
Oh well, it could do. Yes, it could certainly. I've got these are letterpress, lead letterpress blocks, but yes, they could be used for printing. Yes, indeed.
How astonishing!
I haven't got the type. I mean, the type was dissed years ago, but
yes. And did that lead to many people offering you records?
Well, that was purely within the press. That was just distributed to all the workers. Everybody in the printing division had a copy of the Clarendonian. And yes, I think people came to me and said they'd got records, or knew people that had got them. It was a marvellous place to be, really, because there was you've got the sort of normal printing business where a lot of people had sidelines, and you had sort of men who used to repair watches in their lunch hour. If your watch didn't work, you took it to old so-and-so into the machine room, and when he was having his cup of coffee, it would be a slurp and an adjustment, get your watch working for you. Or another chap used to do clocks. I obviously used to repair some gramophones and radios. I used to get a bit of work like that. Yeah, people would say, "I've got an old radio. Can you have a look at it, see if you can do anything with it?" And used to make a bob or two on it, not a lot, but it kept them happy and a bit of amusement.
And it led to opportunities. Didn't you buy a collection of Great War records from a chap?
Oh yes, that was a man who one of the foremen up there, I think. He came to me one day, so my father's just died and we're clearing his house out, and he collected First World War memorabilia and stuff like that, things like that, and he said he's got quite a pile of records we need to get rid of. And there was a lovely pile, about 50 First World War records, or even pre-First World War. There were Cinches, Zonophones, Regal War records in their original sleeves. It was a nice collection. And I had several selections like that, which were really nice. And they really ought to have been kept up as a collection within the collection, but...
Don't worry, viewers, they have been.
Oh, well.
And don't panic. And you bought some cylinders from a chap.
Yes, that's right. One of the foremen said, "We've got a phonograph and some cylinders at home. Would you be interested?" And funnily enough, he'd got a box of the cylinders he had in his office. So I'd seen this box of Edison with Edison written on the top. I thought, eyes sort of come out on stalks. What's this, And anyway, he said, "These are some of the cylinders." He said, "Take those with you and try them." And okay, fair enough. So I went and I eventually bought the phonograph and the cylinders.
Wonderful. What phonograph was it?
Edison Home.
It was a Home.
It was a nice, about 1903 Edison Home.
And there were a lot of pink and black Lambert indestructible cylinders, as I recall. You've still got them, as I recall.
Those came later.
Ah, right. There was a different lot, was it?
I think that was a different batch, yes, different batch. The ones I had at that time were the normal sort of 2-minute Edison, Columbia, Sterling ones, yes.
People get the impression that in the 60s and 70s, wrongly get the impression, I should say, that junk shops were full of Berliners and cylinders piled up at twopence a go, and the friendly proprietors, a bit like old Vickers, were only too pleased to get rid of them. This is not true, is it?
Not in my experience.
No. And did you find cylinders in junk shops in the 60s and 70s?
Not usually, no. Mind you, I followed the leads that I had. Other people may have had more success in different places, because I suppose really, if you think about it, the majority of this trade would have been done in the cities like London. When you get out of London, things aren't quite so... Well, there's probably more money in London for one thing, and when you get out into the provinces, less things are going to be sold and survived.
Well, that's the point. I think people have got to remember that at the time gramophones and phonographs were made, they were very expensive, and country people just didn't have them. They weren't there to be found in the first place, unless they'd come from the sale of the big house or something.
Well, the thing is, companies like the Gramophone Company made quite a range from very expensive machines down to less expensive ones. They did quite a range. So a lot of people tried to get hold of His Master's Voice gramophone if they could, But a lot of them didn't survive. I don't remember.
Well, a lot of people went to cycle shops and bought sort of Swiss machines.
Absolutely, yes, indeed.
You know, they were making those quite late. You know, into the 1930s, they were still available. They look older.
It's funny. You can look at a catalogue of spares catalogue in the sort of early 30s, and you still see things like back brackets and horns, and still advertised even then.
Yes.
And that was years after they'd gone out of standard use.
Yes, it's extraordinary. And people tell me they used to find records and gramophones at local tips and things. Did you ever find anything like that?
Not personally, but that I did have a neighbour when I lived in Witney. He came to see me one day. He was a digger driver or something in a waste tip, and found three or four records. They were metal acetates. They were twisted like mad, but I managed to just about get them playable. So they were worth having. They were Robin Day. You remember the television presenter
with
Robin
the bow tie,
Day,
yes.
the bow tie,
and the rather offensive attitude, as I recall.
And he could be a bit gruff.
If I may say, what did he say to John Knott? Here today, and if I may say, gone tomorrow. And the chap walked out of the interview. That's the fellow. Yes.
Yes. Well, he was president of the Oxford Union at one time.
He was indeed.
And this was a recording that was made of his welcoming speech. I think it was an American group came there. I think it was about 1949. It was a well done speech, and then there was the reply to it, and there were these two. Goodness knows if you'd ever find another copy of them today. But I spent a lot of time straightening them out and getting them roughly playable.
Good Lord, it's extraordinary what was about, isn't it? But you used to buy from various dealers, a chap who had a stall in the market, I believe, at Witney.
Oh yes, he was a great character. Long since departed this earth now, but he used to have lots of stuff coming in there. Yes, he used to buy gramophones and records. I remember his best story with him. He said, I had this chap look at a record. He said he picked it up and it broke, and he said. Well, he said, you've got £1 on that, you can't sell me that for that. He said, well, I'll sell it for you for 50p. He said, you can't sell a broken record. He said, well, half price, half a tune. That was a true one. That was,
oh dear. But you bought all sorts from him, did you?
I bought Pathays, and thereby hangs a very funny story about a portable gramophone I've got upstairs. Went there once. I think it was in the early days of the business when I was at the jam factory and I was still trying to get stock. And I called in to see him one day, and he got two portable gramophones on the stand. One was a HMB 101 or 102. I can't just remember what it was. And the other one was a much more unusual blue colonial or export gramophone. It was an Odeon Model 17. It was. You see Columbia versions of them, big. Like the HMV 97, the one with the short horn that ends at the front.
Yes.
Big versions of that with double spring motors. And this Odeon he'd got there, and it was lovely, and I got hold of that. I think I got it for £65.
Good Lord.
Well, it's one I kept, and I've kept it for years. And then one Christmas I was being pestered to death by people to...
Oh dear.
Kill it.
Well, viewers, we'll say goodbye for today. Part 3 tomorrow.